The year was 2347, and humanity had finally reached the stars. After many years of slow and careful growth through the outer colonies, Earth's united coalition made first contact with the Empire. This was a massive kingdom that controlled over 2,000 star systems across the galaxy. They were an ancient species. They looked like reptiles with scaled skin that changed colors based on how they felt. They had ruled their part of the galaxy for over 6,000 years. They looked at younger species with a mix of interest and disrespect. Ambassador Daniel was chosen to represent humanity in this important meeting. He was a calm man in his early 50s with graying hair and steady hands. Those hands had signed peace treaties on 3 different colony worlds. His wife had begged him not to go on this mission. She had a bad feeling about it. Their daughter was only 12 years old at the time. She had made her father promise to come home safe. Daniel had held her tight and promised he would return. Daniel traveled aboard the diplomatic vessel Meridian. He was joined by a small crew of 15 people. His aide was a young woman named Grace Porter who had worked with him for 5 years. The ship's captain was a veteran naval officer named Samuel Blake. They carried no heavy weapons. This was meant to be a mission of peace and friendship. They wanted to show that humans came with open hearts. The Emperor, the Seventh, had agreed to receive the human delegation at his imperial palace on Prime. This was considered a great honor by everyone in the galaxy. No species had been granted such an audience in over 300 years. The humans felt proud and hopeful. They believed this meeting would mark the beginning of a beautiful friendship between 2 civilizations. When the Meridian landed on Prime, Daniel and his crew were amazed by what they saw. The capital city was enormous. Buildings made of dark metal and glowing crystals reached up into the purple sky. Millions walked the streets. They stopped to stare at the strange pink creatures that had come from the other side of the galaxy. Some looked curious. Others looked disgusted. Guards in golden armor escorted the humans through the winding streets to the Imperial Palace. The palace was the largest building Daniel had ever seen. It was built from black stone that seemed to absorb light. Giant statues of past emperors lined the entrance. Their stone eyes seemed to follow the humans as they walked past. When Daniel walked into the throne room, his breath caught in his chest. The room was massive. The ceiling was so high it disappeared into darkness. Thousands of nobles and officials filled the chamber. They stood in perfect silence, watching the humans approach the throne. Emperor sat upon a throne made of bones. The bones of his enemies, Daniel would later learn. The emperor was larger than the other. His scales were deep purple and gold. His yellow eyes were cold and intelligent. He had ruled the empire for over 200 years. He had crushed rebellions and destroyed entire civilizations. He feared nothing and respected no one. Daniel stopped at the proper distance from the throne. He bowed respectfully, just as the protocol officers had taught him. Then he did what any human would do when meeting someone important. He extended his hand in the traditional human greeting. He smiled warmly, hopping to show friendship and respect. The room went completely silent. Not a single moved or breathed. Emperor looked at Daniel's extended hand. His scales began to shift from purple to a deep, angry red. His advisors whispered among themselves. Their scales flickered with shades of orange and crimson. Something was very wrong. Daniel did not know that in culture, exposing one's palm to a superior was considered a terrible insult. It suggested that the superior was too weak to defend against attack. It was a gesture of contempt, not friendship. Daniel had no way of knowing this. Earth's intelligence on customs was incomplete. The cultural advisors had done their best, but they had missed this crucial detail. Emperor rose slowly from his throne. He stood nearly 8 feet tall. His voice echoed through the chamber like thunder. "You dare mock me in my own court. You bare your hand to me as though I am some common prey, as though I am weak." Daniel's smile faded. He felt a cold knot forming in his stomach. "Your Majesty, I meant no disrespect. This is how humans greet each other. It is a sign of peace and friendship. Please, let me explain. Grace Porter stepped forward, her voice shaking but determined. Emperor, there has been a misunderstanding. In human culture, an open hand means we carry no weapons. It means we come in peace. Ambassador meant only to show respect. But the emperor was not listening. His mind was already made up. He had been insulted in front of his entire court. His honor demanded a response. They were a proud species. They valued strength above all else. To show mercy now would be seen as weakness. Silence, commanded. The single word froze everyone in place. I have heard enough lies from these creatures. They come to our world, eat our food, breathe our air, and then they insult me before my own people. This cannot be forgiven. This will not be forgiven. Daniel's heart was pounding. He looked around the room, searching for any friendly face. He found none. The nobles looked at him with hatred and contempt. Some were already smiling, eager to see what would happen next. Your Majesty, please, Daniel tried again. We came here to build a bridge between our peoples. We came in peace. Earth wants nothing but friendship with the Empire. Emperor laughed. It was a cold, cruel sound. Friendship, they do not need friends. We have subjects, we have slaves, and now we have examples. He raised one clawed hand and pointed at the humans. Execute them all. Let this be a message to the humans. Let it be a message to the entire galaxy. The Empire does not tolerate disrespect. The guards moved swiftly. Daniel tried to fight, but he was grabbed by 4 warriors. Grace screamed as she was pulled away. Captain Samuel Blake managed to knock down 1 guard before 3 more tackled him to the ground. The entire crew of the Meridian was captured in less than a minute. They were dragged outside to the public square. A crowd of thousands had already gathered. Word spread fast in the capital city. The aliens were going to be executed. No one wanted to miss the show. The humans were forced to their knees in a line. Their hands were bound behind their backs. Daniel looked at his crew, at the people who had trusted him, who had followed him across the galaxy. Grace was crying silently. Samuel was staring straight ahead, his jaw clenched tight. Daniel had a small recorder hidden in his collar. It was still transmitting back to Earth. He knew these would be his last words. He thought of the promise he had made to come home. Tell and I love them, he said softly. Tell Earth we came in peace, we came in peace. The executioner raised his blade. 3 days later, the transmission reached Earth. Every human on every world heard Daniel's final words. They heard the sound of the blade. They heard the cheering of the crowd. The world fell silent. And then it began to burn with rage. President Maria Vance stood at the podium in the United Nations chamber. Her face was pale, but her voice did not shake. Behind her, the flags of every nation on Earth hung still in the quiet air. The chamber was packed with representatives from every country. Cameras broadcast her words to every human settlement in the solar system and beyond. 3 days ago, she began, Ambassador Daniel and 14 members of his delegation were executed without trial, without warning, and without cause by the Empire. They were murdered for extending a hand in peace. They were killed for showing friendship. The chamber was completely silent. Representatives from every nation sat with tight jaws and wet eyes. Some had their heads bowed. Others stared at the screen that had shown Daniel's final moments over and over again. The image of those 15 humans kneeling in the alien square had been burned into every mind on Earth. They believe they have sent us a message, President Vance continued. Her voice grew stronger with each word. They believe they have shown us our place in the galaxy. They believe we will cower in fear. They believe we will bow our heads and accept our fate like the other species they have conquered. She paused. Her eyes swept across the room, meeting the gaze of every representative. They are wrong. The chamber erupted. Representatives from nations that had been enemies for centuries stood together and cheered. The sound was deafening. It was not a sound of joy. It was a sound of anger, of determination, of unified purpose. Within 24 hours, the United Coalition Assembly voted to authorize military action against the Empire. The vote was unanimous. It was the first time in human history that every nation on Earth agreed on anything. Old enemies shook hands. Ancient grudges were forgotten. Humanity had found something more important than their differences. They had found a common enemy. Admiral Gregory Cole was placed in command of the newly formed Earth Defense Fleet. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and a quiet intensity that made younger officers nervous. His hair was gray and cut short. His eyes were sharp and missed nothing. He had served in the Mars Uprising and the Europa Crisis. He had commanded ships in battles where the odds were against him. He had never lost. When he received the news of his appointment, he was sitting in his small apartment on Luna Base, drinking coffee and reading reports. He set down his cup and looked at the message for a long moment. Then he stood up and got to work. His first order was to recall every warship in human space to Earth's orbit. Ships came from the outer colonies, from the asteroid mining stations, from deep space patrol routes. Within 2 weeks, 40 warships floated in formation around Earth. It was the largest fleet humanity had ever assembled, and it was not nearly enough. His second order was to begin construction of a new class of warship. He called them the Prometheus-class dreadnoughts. They would be massive vessels, twice the size of anything humanity had ever built. Each one would carry enough firepower to crack a moon in half. The engineers said it would take 2 years to build them. Admiral Cole told them they had 6 months. In shipyards across the solar system, workers began laboring around the clock. 3 shifts a day, 7 days a week. Engineers who had spent their careers designing cargo haulers now designed weapons systems. Scientists who had studied terraforming now studied how to penetrate alien shields. Factory workers who had built mining equipment now built missiles and plasma cannons. They watched from their spy satellites. They had placed surveillance devices throughout human space years ago, long before first contact. They saw the ships gathering. They saw the shipyards working. And they laughed. The Empire's strategists studied the human fleet with amusement. Human ships were primitive. Their weapons were weak. Their shields were thin. They calculated that a single battle group of 50 ships could destroy Earth's entire fleet in a matter of hours. The humans were building toys, nothing more. What they did not understand was that humans were not preparing for a battle. They were preparing for a war. And humans were very, very good at war. 6 months passed. The Earth Defense Fleet grew from 40 ships to 400. New vessels launched every week. Crews trained day and night in combat simulations. Tactics were developed, tested, and refined. Weapons were improved and improved again. The Prometheus-class dreadnoughts were completed ahead of schedule. 7 massive ships, each one a floating fortress bristling with weapons. The workers had pushed themselves to the breaking point. Some had died from exhaustion. They had considered it an honor. Admiral Cole named the flagship Reckoning. It seemed appropriate. During those 6 months, Admiral Cole studied everything humanity knew about the. He read every report, every analysis, every scrap of intelligence. He learned their tactics, their weaknesses, their habits. He learned that they were arrogant. They believed they were invincible. They had not faced a real enemy in over 1,000 years. They had forgotten what it meant to fight someone who could fight back. Cole also reached out to other species in the galaxy. He learned that the Empire had conquered dozens of civilizations over the. These species were slaves now, forced to work in mines and factories, forbidden from having weapons or ships of their own. They hated the with a burning passion. They were waiting for someone to give them hope. On the day the fleet departed Earth's orbit, billions of humans watched from every world. Schools closed so children could see the ships leave. Workers stopped their machines and gathered around screens. Families stood together on observation decks, watching history unfold. Stood on the observation deck of Luna Station with her daughter beside her. was 13 now. She had grown taller in the past year. She had also grown harder. The little girl who had made her father promise to come home was gone. In her place was a young woman who understood that some promises could not be kept. They watched the ships rise in formation. 400 vessels moving as one, their engines blazing like stars against the black. At the center of the formation was the Reckoning, the largest ship humanity had ever built. It carried Admiral Cole and 3,000 crew members. It carried enough weapons to level a continent. Squeezed her mother's hand. "They are going to make them pay, aren't they?" Nodded, tears streamed down her face, but her voice was steady. "Yes, sweetheart, they are." Far away in the throne room on Prime, Emperor received reports about the human fleet. His advisors assured him there was nothing to worry about. The humans were primitive. Their ships were slow. Their weapons were weak. The Empire would crush them easily when the time came. Nodded and dismissed the reports. He had already forgotten about the humans he had executed. They had been insects, nothing more. Their deaths had served their purpose. The galaxy had received the message. The Empire was not to be challenged. He did not know that 400 human ships were already traveling toward his space. He did not know that Admiral Cole had spent 6 months planning his destruction. He did not know that billions of humans had sworn to avenge their fallen ambassador. He did not know that his empire had 6 months left to live. The fleet traveled in silence through the darkness between stars. Admiral Cole stood on the bridge of the Reckoning, watching the stars streak past. He thought about Daniel and the 14 people who had died with him. He thought about the promise he had made to the families of the fallen. "We are coming," he said quietly to the darkness, "and we do not forgive." The colony of Minor was a mining world on the edge of the Empire. It sat in a quiet corner of space, far from the great battles and politics of the core worlds. Approximately 2 million citizens lived there, working in the mines and processing plants that pulled valuable metals from the rocky ground. A small garrison of 300 soldiers protected the colony. They had never seen real combat. They spent most of their time breaking up bar fights and chasing smugglers. The planetary governor was a minor noble named. He was a fat who had been sent to this distant world because no one at court wanted him around. He spent his days eating expensive food and complaining about his boring assignment. When his intelligence officer brought him reports of human ships approaching the system, he laughed and threw the reports in the trash. "Human ships here," snorted with amusement. "Those primitive creatures can barely build vessels that hold air. They are probably lost. Ignore them." The intelligence officer hesitated. "Governor, the reports indicate over 400 ships. That is a significant force." Waved his hand dismissively. 400 garbage scows are still garbage scows. The humans are no threat to anyone. Now leave me alone. My dinner is getting cold. He received his answer at dawn. The Earth Defense Fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. 400 ships arranged in a crescent around the planet, their weapons systems already powered and ready. The precision of their arrival was remarkable. Not a single ship was out of position. They moved as one, like a single organism with 400 parts. Admiral Gregory Cole stood on the bridge of the Reckoning, his hands clasped behind his back. The main showed the planet below, blue and brown and green, peaceful, unsuspecting. He felt no pleasure in what he was about to do, but he felt no hesitation either. "Open a channel," he ordered. Lieutenant Shaw, the communications officer, nodded. She was young, only 26, but she had proven herself capable under pressure. Her fingers moved across her console with practiced speed. "Channel open, sir." Cole's voice was calm, almost gentle. "Attention, colony of Minor. This is Admiral Gregory Cole of the Earth Defense Fleet. 6 months ago, your empire executed 15 humans who came to you in peace. We are here to deliver our response." He paused, allowing his words to travel down to the planet below. You have 1 hour to evacuate all civilian personnel. We will not fire on evacuation ships. After 1 hour, we will destroy every military installation on this world. If you resist, we will destroy everything else as well. This is not a negotiation. This is a warning. Governor was eating breakfast when the message came through. He choked on his food and had to be slapped on the back by a servant. When he could breathe again, his scales had turned pale gray with fear. He ran to the command center, his fat belly bouncing with each step. "What is happening?" he screamed at his officers. "Why are there human ships around my planet?" His military commander, a veteran named, was already at his station. "Governor, they appeared without warning. Our sensors did not detect their approach until they were already here. They must have new stealth technology." "I do not care about their technology. Get rid of them." Hesitated. "Sir, they outnumber us significantly. Perhaps we should contact the Imperial fleet and request reinforcements." "Reinforcements?" Scales flushed red with anger and embarrassment. "You want me to call the Emperor and tell him that I cannot handle a few human ships? He will have me executed. No, we will deal with this ourselves. Launch the defense fighters. Show these animals what warriors are capable of." Knew this was a mistake. He had studied the reports about human weapons development. He knew the humans had been building something dangerous, but orders were orders. He gave the command. 80 fighters rose from the surface. They were sleek, fast, deadly machines piloted by trained warriors who had spent their entire lives preparing for combat. They formed up in attack formation and accelerated toward the human fleet. Their pilots were confident and eager. This would be easy. These were just humans after all. The battle lasted 4 minutes. Human targeting systems, developed in secret over the past 6 months, tracked the fighters with mechanical precision. The systems could calculate the position, speed, and trajectory of every enemy ship simultaneously. They could predict where each fighter would be 3 seconds in the future. They never missed. Missiles launched from the human fleet in coordinated waves. Each missile was guided by advanced artificial intelligence that could adjust its course hundreds of times per second. The pilots tried to evade. They tried to use countermeasures. Nothing worked. The first wave of missiles destroyed 40 fighters in seconds. The second wave destroyed 30 more. The surviving 10 pilots turned to flee, but they never made it back to the atmosphere. Human, firing projectiles at a significant fraction of the speed of light, tore through their ships like paper. On the surface, Governor watched the battle on his display screen. His mouth hung open. His scales had turned completely white. In 4 minutes, his entire defense force had been wiped out. The humans had not lost a single ship. "Begin evacuation immediately," said quietly. "If we are still here in 1 hour, we will all die." For once did not argue. Evacuation ships began launching immediately. Cargo vessels, passenger transports, personal shuttles. Anything that could fly was pressed into service. Millions of scrambled to get off the planet. There was pushing and shoving and panic, but most of them made it to the ships. True to his word, Admiral Cole allowed every evacuation ship to pass unmolested. The human fleet simply watched as vessel after vessel rose from the surface and fled into space. Some of the pilots could not believe it. They expected to be shot down at any moment, but the humans held their fire. For 57 minutes, civilian transports streamed away from Minor while the Earth fleet waited in complete silence. Not a single weapon was fired. Not a single threatening move was made. The humans just waited, patient and implacable. When the hour ended, Admiral Cole looked at his tactical display. The military installations on the surface were highlighted in red. The evacuated civilian areas were highlighted in green. He had kept his promise. Now it was time to deliver his message. "Fire," he said, a single word spoken quietly. The Prometheus-class dreadnoughts unleashed their main weapons. 7 ships fired simultaneously, releasing concentrated plasma beams that burned through the atmosphere like the fingers of an angry god. The beam struck the military bases on the surface. Metal melted. Stone vaporized. Soldiers who had been too slow to evacuate died instantly, without even knowing what had hit them. Within 10 minutes, every garrison, every weapons depot, every military installation on Minor was reduced to molten slag. Craters marked the places where the bases had stood. Smoke rose into the sky, visible from orbit. The message was clear. Then the fleet. Admiral Cole ordered his ships to pull back. They regrouped at the edge of the system and then jumped away, vanishing into faster-than-light travel as quickly as they had arrived. The entire operation, from arrival to departure, had taken less than 2 hours. Word of the attack spread across the Empire within hours. Governor, now a refugee on a crowded transport ship, sent frantic messages to the imperial court. Other officials picked up the story. News networks broadcast the footage of the burning military bases. The image of those 7 plasma beams cutting through the sky became the most viewed video in the Empire's history. The High Command was stunned. How had humans developed such weapons? How had they arrived without being detected? How had they destroyed 80 fighters without losing a single ship? The questions had no answers. Emperor demanded explanations. His admirals and generals stood before him with empty hands and pale scales. They had underestimated the humans. They had dismissed them as primitives. They had been wrong. Over the next 3 months, the Earth Defense Fleet struck 17 more worlds. Each time, they offered civilians the chance to evacuate. Each time, they destroyed only military targets. Each time, they left no defenders alive. They began calling Admiral Cole by a new name. They called him the Ghost of Reckoning. They said he could appear anywhere without warning. They said his ships moved like shadows through space. They said his weapons could not be stopped. The stories spread from world to world, growing larger with each telling. Mothers told their children to behave, or the ghost would come for them. Soldiers prayed they would never see the human fleet. Even hardened warriors began to show fear. The empire that had ruled for 6,000 years was starting to crack. The empire had stood for 6,000 years. It had survived rebellions, invasions, plagues, and civil wars. It had crushed rival civilizations and absorbed dozens of species into its grasp. Its leaders believed the empire was eternal. They believed it could never fall. They believed they were invincible. Humanity proved them wrong in 8 months. The true genius of the human campaign was not its firepower, though that was impressive. It was not the speed of their ships or the accuracy of their weapons. It was precision. Admiral Gregory Cole did not waste his resources attacking heavily defended core worlds where they kept their main fleets. Instead, he targeted the things the Empire needed to survive. Supply lines were the first to fall. The military required constant shipments of fuel, food, ammunition, and spare parts. These supplies traveled along established routes, protected by small escort fleets. Admiral Cole studied these routes for weeks. He learned their schedules, their weaknesses, their blind spots. Then he struck. Human ships appeared at supply depots and fuel stations throughout the Empire. They destroyed the facilities and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. Within 2 months, the military was struggling to keep its ships fueled. Soldiers on distant worlds began running low on ammunition. Repair parts became impossible to find. Communication relays were next. The Empire relied on a network of relay stations to send messages across its vast territory. Without these relays, orders from the capital could take weeks to reach distant commanders. Cole's ships destroyed relay station after relay station. Soon, entire sectors of the Empire were cut off from central command. Governors had to make decisions without guidance. Admirals had to fight without orders. They tried to fight back. They sent battle groups to hunt the human fleet, but Cole was always one step ahead. His intelligence network, built with help from the enslaved species of the Empire, told him where the ships were going before they arrived. He would strike one system while the enemy fleet searched another. By the time they realized they had been fooled, Cole was already gone. Meanwhile, on Earth, a second front was opening. Director Price of United Coalition Intelligence had spent her entire career studying information warfare. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and a brilliant mind. She understood that empires were not held together by armies alone. They were held together by belief. The belief that the ruling power was strong. The belief that resistance was impossible. The belief that the current order would last forever. She set out to destroy that belief. Her agents began broadcasting messages throughout the empire. These messages were sent on frequencies they could not block. They were translated into every language spoken by every species under rule. The message was simple: they are not gods, they bleed, they fall, and humanity is proving it every day. The broadcasts included footage of human victories. They showed ships exploding. They showed military bases burning. They showed the great empire being humiliated by a species they had dismissed as primitive. The footage spread from world to world and shared in secret. The enslaved species of the empire began to stir. They were the first to rise. They were a species of tall, thin beings with 4 arms and excellent technical skills. They had conquered them 800 years ago and forced them to work in factories building weapons and ships. For 8 centuries, they had obeyed without question. They had forgotten what freedom felt like. But the human broadcasts reminded them. They saw that they could be beaten. They saw that resistance was possible. And something inside them, something that had been sleeping for 800 years, finally woke up. The rebellion began on 7 worlds simultaneously. Workers seized control of factories. Guards were overwhelmed. Weapons that had been built for them were turned against them. Within a week, they had liberated 3 entire systems. Other species followed. There were master engineers who had been forced to build warships. They began sabotaging their own work. Ships would launch from the shipyards and then fall apart in space. Engines would fail. Weapons would malfunction. The admirals could not understand why their new ships kept breaking down. They were a race of telepaths. They had used them as interrogators, forcing them to rip secrets from the minds of prisoners. Now they turned their abilities against their masters. They read the thoughts of officers and sent the information to human intelligence. They planted suggestions in the minds of guards, making them forget passwords and leave doors unlocked. Emperor found himself fighting a war on 100 fronts. His supply lines were in ruins. His communications were disrupted. His slave species were rebelling. And somewhere out in the darkness, the ghost of reckoning was still hunting. In desperation, the emperor made a decision. He would assemble the largest fleet in history. 3,000 warships, crewed by the best soldiers the empire had to offer. He would send this armada directly to Earth. He would burn the human to ashes. Kill the head, he reasoned, and the body would die. Grand Admiral was chosen to command the fleet. He was the empire's most celebrated military leader, a veteran of 100 battles who had never known defeat. His scales were covered with scars from wounds he had received in combat. His eyes were cold and calculating. If anyone could destroy the humans, it was him. The fleet departed Prime with great ceremony. Priests blessed the ships and prayed for victory. Citizens lined the streets of the capital to cheer. Flags waved. Music played. Emperor himself stood on the palace balcony and watched the ships rise into the sky. "Go," he commanded, "destroy them all." Grand Admiral stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked at the tactical display. 3,000 ships under his command. It was more firepower than any commander had ever wielded. The humans had perhaps 400 ships. The math was simple. This would not be a battle. It would be an extermination. But the fleet never reached Earth. Admiral Cole had been watching. His intelligence network had told him about the Armada weeks before it launched. He had studied its tactics, his habits, his weaknesses. He knew exactly where to meet him. The nebula was a region of dense gas clouds that stretched across 3 star systems. The gas disrupted sensor systems and forced ships to fight at close range. Large fleets lost their advantage there because they could not coordinate. It was the perfect place for an ambush. Cole positioned his fleet inside the nebula and waited. When Sarmata arrived, they found the human ships already in position. The admiral was not worried. He still had superior numbers. He ordered his fleet to advance and engage. The battle lasted 6 hours. It was the largest naval engagement in galactic history. Thousands of ships fought in the swirling clouds of the nebula, their weapons lighting up the gas like lightning in a storm. They had numbers. The humans had tactics. Cole had divided his fleet into small, fast groups that could move independently. They struck the formation from multiple angles, targeting weak points and then withdrawing before the enemy could respond. The large ships could not maneuver quickly enough. They became targets. Grand Admiral tried everything. He changed formations. He called for reinforcements. He led charges himself. Nothing worked. Every time he thought he had the humans trapped, they would slip away and appear somewhere else. It was like fighting smoke. When the battle ended, 1,400 ships had been destroyed. Grand Admiral was among the dead. His flagship had been torn apart by plasma fire from the Reckoning. Human losses totaled 32 vessels. The news reached Prime 3 days later. Emperor received it in his throne room, surrounded by his advisors. His scales, once vibrant and proud, had faded to a sickly gray. His eyes were empty. "How?" he whispered. "They are primitives, they are nothing. How did this happen?" His chief advisor, an ancient named, finally found the courage to speak. He had served 5 emperors. He had seen the empire at its greatest heights. Now he watched it falling. "They are not nothing, your majesty," said quietly. "They are humans, and they do not forgive." The Earth Defense Fleet arrived at Prime on the anniversary of Daniel's execution. This was not a coincidence. Admiral Gregory Cole had planned it this way. He wanted them to understand exactly why this was happening. He wanted them to remember the choice their emperor had made 1 year ago. 1,000 human warships surrounded the. They hung in orbit like a ring of steel, their weapons pointed at the surface below. The planet that had ruled the galaxy for 6,000 years now found itself helpless, its defenses shattered, its fleets destroyed, its allies fled. Every communication channel on the planet carried the same message. It was broadcast in every language, repeated over and over again, so no one could claim they had not heard it. "People of Prime, this is Admiral Gregory Cole of the Earth Defense Fleet. 1 year ago, your empire executed Ambassador Daniel and 14 members of his delegation for the crime of extending a hand in peace. Today, you will answer for that crime." The streets of the capital emptied. Millions of fled to shelters, to temples, to basements and bunkers. They hid wherever they thought they might be safe. Parents held their children close. The elderly prayed to gods who seemed very far away. Everyone expected the sky to fill with fire at any moment. But the fire did not come. The imperial palace was silent. The great halls that had once echoed with the footsteps of thousands of servants and officials were empty. The guards still stood at their posts, their weapons clutched in trembling claws. They knew their weapons would be useless against the fleet above. They stood there anyway, because they did not know what else to do. Emperor sat alone on his throne of bones. He had dismissed his advisors, his servants, even his personal guards. The great chamber that had witnessed his moment of triumph 1 year ago was now cold and dark. Only a few lights still burned, casting long shadows across the floor. He sat and waited. If this was to be the end of the empire, if this was to be the end of his life, he would face it with whatever dignity remained. He would not hide. He would not beg. He was still the emperor, even if his empire was falling apart around him. The great doors of the throne room swung open. Admiral Cole walked in alone. He carried no weapons. He wore no armor, just his simple uniform, the same one he had worn through every battle of the war. His footsteps echoed on the polished stone floor as he walked toward the throne. He stopped 10 paces away and stood in silence, studying the emperor. Looked older than his images suggested. His scales were dull and gray. His eyes, once sharp and cruel, were now tired and empty. "You came to gloat." The emperor's voice was hollow. It echoed in the empty chamber like the voice of a ghost. "No," Cole replied. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "I came to offer you a choice." His eyes narrowed. He had not expected this. "What choice could you possibly offer me? You have destroyed my fleets. You have burned my colonies. You have turned my slaves against me. What is left to choose?" Cole reached into his jacket and produced a small device. He pressed a button, and a holographic image appeared in the air between them. It showed a young woman standing on an observation deck. Her face was streaked with tears. Her hand was pressed against the glass. Behind her, ships rose into the darkness. "This is," Cole said. "She is 14 years old. 1 year ago, you murdered her father because he extended his hand to you in greeting. You killed him for showing respect in the human way." Looked at the image but said nothing. The girl's face was burned into his memory now. He would see it every time he closed his eyes for the rest of his life. "I could destroy this planet," Cole continued. His voice remained steady without anger or hatred. "I could kill every living thing on the surface and turn you into a monument to human vengeance. My people would celebrate. They would call me a hero. Would understand. She lost her father. She has every right to want your entire species wiped from existence." He paused, letting the silence stretch. Outside, 1,000 warships waited for his command. One word from him and Prime would burn. "But I did not come here to become you." Cole deactivated the hologram. The image faded away. He met the Emperor's gaze directly, human eyes staring into alien eyes. "Here is your choice," Cole said. "You will surrender unconditionally. You will release every species your empire has enslaved. You will pay reparations to the families of those you murdered. You will dismantle your military and allow inspectors to verify compliance. And you will stand trial before a galactic court for your crimes. And if I refuse, then I will leave this system, and I will return in 1 month with every weapon humanity can build. And I will show the galaxy what happens when you murder our children." Emperor looked at the human standing before him. This small, fragile creature from a small, fragile world. 1 year ago, he had ordered the execution of 15 such creatures without a second thought. He had considered them insects, unworthy of his attention. He had been wrong. They had conquered dozens of species. They had built an empire that stretched across thousands of stars. They had believed they were the greatest power in the galaxy, but they had never faced an enemy like humanity. They had never faced a species that refused to surrender, refused to submit, refused to forget. "I accept your terms," the Emperor said quietly. The words tasted like ashes in his mouth. Cole nodded once. "I thought you might." The surrender was broadcast across the galaxy. Every species, every world, every ship in space heard the news. The Empire, the great power that had ruled for 6,000 years, had fallen, and it had fallen to a species that had only been traveling between stars for a few centuries. 3 months later, the Treaty of New Geneva was signed in a ceremony attended by representatives from every known species in the galaxy. The Empire was formally dissolved. In its place, a federation of free states was established. The enslaved species were granted their freedom. And dozens of others could finally govern themselves. Emperor was put on trial for crimes against sentient beings. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Thousands of witnesses about the atrocities committed under his rule. When the verdict came, No one was surprised. Guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to life imprisonment on a remote world where he would spend his remaining years alone with his memories. Attended the signing ceremony as an honored guest. She was 15 now, tall and serious, with her father's steady gaze. When reporters asked her how she felt, she looked into the cameras and spoke clearly. My father came to them with an open hand. They answered with violence. We answered with justice. I hope the galaxy understands the difference. Admiral Gregory Cole retired from military service shortly after the treaty was signed. He had won the greatest victory in human history, but he took no pleasure in it. Too many people had died. Too many worlds had burned. He returned to Earth and spent his remaining years tending a small garden outside his home. Visited him once, a year after the war ended. They sat together on his porch and watched the sunset. Thank you, she said quietly, for everything. Cole shook his head. I did what needed to be done. Your husband was a good man. He deserved better. He believed in peace, said. Even at the end, he believed that humans and could be friends someday. Cole was silent for a long moment. Maybe they can, he said finally, but not yet. The galaxy needed to learn something first. They needed to learn that humanity remembers. They needed to learn that we protect our own. And they needed to learn that when someone hurts us, we do not forgive easily. Nodded, do you think they learned? Cole looked up at the sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear. Somewhere out there, 1,000 species were building new lives in the ruins of the old empire. Somewhere out there, the galaxy was changing. Yes, he said, I think they learned. Humanity had announced its presence to the stars, not as conquerors who crushed everything in their path, not as victims who accepted whatever fate others chose for them. They had announced themselves as something far more dangerous. A species that remembered every wrong done to them. A species that responded to violence with overwhelming force. A species that could be merciful when they chose to be, but whose mercy had to be earned. The galaxy would never forget the lesson of the human war. For thousands of years to come, species would tell stories about the small pink creatures from the small blue world. They would tell stories about the ambassador who extended his hand in peace. They would tell stories about the girl who lost her father. They would tell stories about the admiral who could have destroyed a world but chose justice instead. And they would remember the most important lesson of all. Never harm a human, because humanity remembers, humanity responds, and humanity never ever stops.